Top 5, a show where we count things down from number 5 all the way to number 1. And this week on the show, a topic we haven't visited since our very first episode, all the way in the long before times. Martial arts movies. Our top 5 martial arts movies this week on Top 5. Rodrigo, what do you have for your number 5?
My number 5 is a movie that's probably not higher because I don't remember most of it.
Oh, okay.
But when we, it's a sequel, so the first and second one like really run together in my mind. But when this topic came up, I was like, okay, what is immediately what I think of a kick-ass like martial arts scene in a movie? And the very first thing that came to my mind was Donnie Yen and Sammo Hung fighting each other on top of like a completely unsecured table. Like there's just like the legs, and then like the table part is like separate and like wobbling around.
Yeah. I think our number 5s are the same.
Yep. So my number 5 is Ip Man 2.
Oh, okay. My number 5 is Ip Man.
Yeah.
The first one. Okay.
So yeah, good times.
Yeah, there's something. So for people who don't know about the Ip Man series, there's 4 of them, 3 or 4 of them in the series. They are the quote unquote supposed true tale of Ip Man, the man who became the martial arts Wing Chun master and trained Bruce Lee in all of his martial arts ways. And, he's highly revered. The thing is, the Ip Man series is quite fictionalized. They leave out major parts of it. There is another competitor, I think it's called Grandmaster, I think is the series. And it's basically the Ip Man story, but it's like, hey, we're not sugarcoating the part where he left his wife for another woman and all of these other things. But seeing Donnie Yen in Ip Man is really cool to see the fight choreography and everything that's going on there. It is highly choreographed, it is very interesting. If you just want to go into a fictionalized account of the trainer of Bruce Lee, this is the place to go. Now, why did you like Ip Man 2 over Ip Man? Is it just because of the one fight in the restaurant?
I basically, it's been forever since I saw them, and I saw them both at the same time. Like I saw them both together. And so I don't remember which scenes are from which, but the first scene that I thought of, I was like, okay, which one has this scene? Yeah. And that's Ip Man 2. So I was like, well, I'll put in Ip Man 2 because that has one of like the most memorable fight scene out of all of them, which is really, at least it was for me. And it's probably because Sammo Hung brings so much to it. Like, Donnie Yen is great. Amazing. Yeah, but Sammo Hung is just such a great performer too.
Yeah, very good. All right, Matthew, what do you have for your number 5?
My number 5 features a performer who is kind of like Sammo Hung, but not as good in any way at all. And his name is Kurt Thomas, and Kurt Thomas is an Olympic gymnast. And an Olympic gymnast who went, hey, let's go ahead and see if I can get a movie deal. So they gave him a movie deal. And in 1985, they gave us Gymkata, a combination of gymnastics and karate. And it is the silliest thing you've ever seen. But honestly, I remember seeing this movie when it came out and going, well, even I know this is dumb, but it's kind of fun to see how they hide parallel bars in ways, and how the big battle takes place, kind of like a certain, big film by Bruce Lee takes place when he's surrounded by bad guys, but just so happens that in the middle of the field is a cistern that looks remarkably like a pommel horse.
Yeah,
because it is in fact a pommel horse. And so the main character, his name is Jonathan, because every main character is named Jonathan, has to break into the country of Parmesan to save some sort of local princess. I don't know. You really don't need to know. Honestly, if you've ever seen, there's a Family Guy episode where Brian gets into the stock market. I believe it's a season 15 episode. If you've seen Stewie in the episode of Family Guy fighting with his Gymkata, you've honestly seen Gymkata, or most of Gymkata. But the thing about the movie is, much like a lot of films from my youth, like Condor Man, like Super Fuzz, like terrible, terrible movies that hit when I was between the ages of 8 and 14. It stuck in my mind forever. And it is a running gag in Mystery Science Theater, where whenever they have a kung fu movie, you will hear cries of Haikiba and also Jim Kata. Why? Because Jim Kata is so abysmal that that joke is actually better than the movie. Why is it on my top 5 list? Because it was the first thing that popped into my head. And I said, I can't put Jim Kata on this list. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to put Jim Kata on this list. I had to. It was the law. It was just, I had to do it. It was my destiny.
Very cool. Rodrigo, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is a movie that I also saw a very long time that is actually kind of hard to track down nowadays.
Got it. If our lists mirrors each other so closely, I'm going to be very upset because mine was also hard to track down. But please go ahead.
So this,
you guys have the same list, and I have Jim Kata.
This movie is sometimes called The Legend.
Oh God!
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Well, Feng Sai, I mean, good taste.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So yeah, Feng Sai-yuk, right? Good.
Yep.
Good movie. Excellent fight scenes. It's an action comedy.
And I will say this: that's kind of how I got introduced to Jet Li. Was not through like The One or anything like that. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, I just got this DVD in from I think China. I think he imported it directly from China." And he's like, "You're going to love this movie." And we sat down and watched it. And I was just like, "Oh my God, this is funny, and the martial arts is great." And he's like, "Yeah, it's this guy Jet Li. He's got another movie coming out in a couple of months called The One."
Not as good as Feng Sai-yuk.
No, not at all.
Yeah, it's got great action scenes, great comedy, like really over the top action. There's like a great fight at a dye works. There's a fight where it's fought entirely on top of other people's heads.
Yes, that's my favorite scene.
Yeah, just fantastic. There's one where like somebody fights someone off with like a cello and like a drumstick, like not a drumstick, but like a turkey leg.
Yeah.
It's pretty ridiculous. It's hard. Like sometimes you're like, oh, what's like, I think in the US, sometimes people are like, oh, what's like really ridiculous over the top kung fu stuff. But it's like, it's hard. It's hard to do something that's more over the top. This movie's from 1993, and it's already like so over the top that like it's hard to match it even today.
Yeah, I mean, even if you try to say compare it to a Jackie Chan movie, and you think Jackie Chan action sequences are kind of over the top and silly. No, you guys need to go and track down. It's hard to find, but Legend of Feng Sai-yuk. The one that you will find is the sequel called Legend 2. It's available on Prime, I want to say. I don't think it is as good, but apparently people like it a lot more. But for me, it's hands down Legend. Just the whole fight on top of the heads is amazing. And for that alone, that's the one reason to go and check out that movie. It took me a long time because I had forgotten the name of the movie. And I was like, oh, what's that movie with the guy and the fighting on top of the heads? And I had to do a search a couple of days ago. And finally, it's like Feng Sai-yuk Legend 2. And I'm like, no, not Legend 2, but Legend. And I figured I would be the only one talking about Feng Sai-yuk. Rodrigo has got me again.
I had film school friends. So a lot of these movies were making the rounds back in the 2000s.
All right. Well, I'm going to bet our number 3s are very different. But before we can find out, Matthew, what is your number 4?
Well, it's not a Corey Yuden film. I'll tell you that for free. My number 4 is actually a movie that I appreciate more than the others in the franchise for one simple reason. And that's it has an extended sequence where the main character has to get across a city. And many years ago on this very show, Top 5, we were all witness to the horrific calumny of the movie The Warriors from 1979, where someone called it a horrible B movie. And they're dead to me forever, like Fred Flintstone's can opener. But when I watched my number 4, John Wick, Chapter 4, And the riff of John Wick trying to cross the city was then announced with the DJ leaning into her mic and telling the boppers that our friend is getting close to his goal. And the extended little references to the Warriors, I actually started paying attention and realizing this John Wick movie is actually pretty interesting. The previous three, I've seen them all. I've watched them and I've gone, oh, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I like the intensity that Keanu brings to the character. I like seeing all of these guys doing their thing. I like especially the car stunts. But there's a point where Keanu and Donnie Yen are climbing a staircase. And so Keanu starts alone and he gets knocked back down to the bottom. And then we see Donnie Yen. Donnie Yen is actually playing a blind assassin named Kane, which a Kung Fu reference, that's double points. And we think that Kane has arrived to kill Donnie, but in fact, he's going to help him get to the top of the staircase where Kane is then honor bound to fight John to the death. And so it's this beautiful sequence where they go up the stairs, John gets knocked back down. They go up the stairs together, they get a ways up, John gets knocked back down. Finally, they have to work together, they get to the top. And just the whole time, I'm thinking the cops got Ajax. And because that little hook brought me into the film, John Wick 4 is still my favorite. I've now seen all of them more than once. 4 is still the best, partly because of that cool ending, partly because, Rawhide is in it. And it turns out that Rawhide is actually an immortal killer working for this League of Assassins around the world. And we know that it's true. That means that Buckaroo Banzai is somewhere in this world. And of course, the guy from Steven's favorite Western is immortal and now owns a hotel in Manhattan. But if you've never seen John Wick 4, I don't recommend starting there. But if you have, this is a really, really good movie. And as far as American Kung Fu movies go, really well done, really, comparable with some of the best stuff that we see out of, Hong Kong and Chinese cinema.
Very cool. We'll be right back. We're now into our number threes. Rodrigo, what do you have for your number three? As he strokes his long white beard. What indeed?
My number three is an American movie.
Oh, okay.
It features everyone who would then go on to play some sort of superhero later.
The Rats of Nim.
Yes, the Rats of Nim.
Oh, cool.
No.
Rats of Nim. That's my number three.
No, I'm talking about Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Oh.
Got to beat down Green Lantern and Superman.
Yeah.
He beats up everybody because he beats up Captain America and the Human Torch.
Yep.
And technically also the Atom.
Yeah. He only beats Captain Marvel technically in that Captain Marvel was teaming with Superman and she walks away after he beats Superman.
Yeah, and then the Huntress beats up Egg from Arrested Development.
I believe she played a superhero too, but I can't remember. I know she's voiced a superhero.
Yeah, probably. She's definitely done a lot of stuff since then. So yeah, Scott Pilgrim versus the World has a lot of big fancy fight scenes. They're actually most are pretty short. And especially as I was putting together this list and going back and watching some, they're definitely short compared to the fight scenes in like Hong Kong action movies from the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Those fight scenes were long, very long by comparison. But Scott Pilgrim vs. the World does not in any way overstay its welcome and really kind of left me wanting more of that action.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of hard to find. Definitely not a movie that's kind of stylized enough to do that with its action. It makes it kind of difficult, especially as we'd move on into that era where all these guys become superheroes and shaky cam becomes pretty much ubiquitous, right? Mm-hmm. So definitely the way the fights are shot in Scott Pilgrim is like very cool, very dynamic, very interesting, and you can see everything that's happening. So my number 3, Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yeah. I just figured it out. Roxy Richter is the voice of Katara. So she beat a waterbender, or he beat a waterbender.
There you go.
Yeah.
And the closest that Knives Chow got to an action thing looks to be Glow, the TV series.
Right.
About the wrestlers.
She was in that.
And then also in a horror movie called The Void, which is pretty much gross. It's probably my grossest movie that I love to watch. But it's not a superhero movie. So there you go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the commercial break has created the deviation in our timelines, because my number 3 is one that is, let's say that you're a kid growing up and you discover all these old martial arts movies at your local video store, and you and your friends, all you do is watch martial arts movies all day. And you're also into hip hop music, and you want to invent new styles. And so you decide to name your group after a movie called Shaolin and Wu-Tang, or Shaolin versus Wu-Tang, right? And one of those members of the Wu-Tang Clan, RZA, went out and said, I watched these movies all my life. I want to make my own over-the-top martial arts film in the style of the movies that I love. And he went out and created Man with the Iron Fists. And Man with the Iron Fists, starting RZA, or the RZA, if you want to be more proper. Yeah. It's got Russell Crowe in it. It's got Lucy Liu. It's got Jamie Chung. It's got Dave Bautista in it. It is a crazy, over-the-top, like, modern version of a 1970s martial arts film. If you're going to watch this, I would recommend getting the extended cut or the director's cut, because it does have a little bit more story in it, especially between RZA's character and Jamie Chung's character. And I just love that Russell Crowe is just like, no, I'm going to be over the top crazy in this, almost like the way that we meet Mel Gibson's character in the first Lethal Weapon movie. He's kind of like that. And this is like Flying Guillotine kind of crazy as far as the weapons that everybody has. The fact that RZA's character gets his hands cut off, and so he literally has these 2 iron fists. He makes these 2 iron fists that he then fuses on to his body. Russell Crowe has this spinning blade gun that is all kinds of crazy. Lucy Liu, who runs the prostitute house, the brothel, she's got all these crazy weapons. It is.
Doesn't Dave Bautista play Colossus in that movie, basically?
Well, basically, yeah. He's a guy that can turn his skin into, I think, iron, brass. Or copper, brass. That's what it is. Brass, and so, there's a whole, it's crazy. It's crazy. Now that I've been talking about it, I got to go watch it again tonight. So we better get through the rest of our list. This came out in 2012. It's definitely worth your time. The Man with the Iron Fists at my number 3. Matthew, what do you have at your number 3?
My number 3 is weirdly a sequel to a movie that is in no way a kung fu film. But I actually used to watch, Stephen and I we often reminisce about Channel 41 out of Kansas City, back in the day that it was an independent station. And Channel 41 had a lot of night shows, and one of them was Wild West Theater. Now, I don't know if it was ever an actual Western thing, but they would start Wild West Theater by talking about how in the West things were crazy. And then you would see them pan over and you'd see the globe spin to China and Japan. And they're like, we're talking way, way West. And they would play these kung fu movies. One of the ones that I saw is Billy Jack from 1971. So it's as old as I am. Billy Jack is the second film in the Billy Jack quadrilogy. Billy Jack, of course, is played by Tom Laughlin, who was a legitimate, what my mother's third husband would call karate man. And Billy Jack would kick people in the face. He was a Hapkido master. And so throughout these films, and again, there are 4. This is the only one that's actually good. But I do recommend watching all of them just to sort of absorb the trash into your pores so that it inoculates you against future bad movies. But Billy Jack is the story of a man with a big flat hat who goes around barefoot and kicks people really hard. And that is basically the whole thing. I think he eventually, in one of the sequels, ends up going to Washington and running for president. But remarkably, Leonard Maltin loved this movie. I don't know why. And it also did spawn a hit single. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the song One Tin Soldier, where you go ahead and shoot your neighbor and
peace on earth was all it said.
Yeah. So if you heard the song, I think you could kind of feel the vibe of this movie. It's a weird kind of
semi post hippie movie.
It is kind of post hippie, but it's got a weird counterculture vibe while also feeling very modern right wingy, almost 80s right wingy, which is kind of strange. But I will say this about Billy Jack: never in my life up to that point, and again, when this movie came out, I was 4 months old, had anyone played a character so well suited to their incredibly limited skill set. Tom Laughlin, not a great actor, but he's playing a character whose entire thing is, I am a stoic, I do not respond until I do, and at that point, I kick you in the head. So really, he's like a proto Ed Gruberman. But Billy Jack is actually a pretty solid movie. I do recommend it. My number 3 made $10 million in 1971, which by today's standards, I believe, is $750 billion.
I don't know if it's that much, but it
is.
Definitely add a zero onto that. So, all right, we are into our number 2s, and Rodrigo, what do you have for your number 2?
My number 2 martial arts movie is a movie that is technically a sequel, but I don't think anybody in the West saw the first one. Mm-hmm. This is in the US, it's called The Legend of Drunken Master.
Oh yeah, that's on my almost ran.
Most places, I think it's called Drunken Master 2. 1994 is a Jackie Chan movie. The reason why I like it, there's lots of reasons to like it. The first one is that Jackie Chan kind of plays Jackie Chan in every movie that he's in, but this particular movie gives him a reason for his antics, right? If you've seen Rush Hour, Rush Hour is lots of fun, but you're like, why is this amazing international cop so bumbling, right? But in Drunken Master, you're like, oh yeah, well, it makes sense that Jackie Chan will do all this stuff. He's very motivated. He has to do whatever he wants. It's got great scenes. It shows off lots of different stuff. It's not just Jackie Chan always doing his thing. There's like a cool guy at the end who's like a kicker. He kicks a lot. So I also like it because it's kind of probably the sweet spot between Jackie Chan's earlier work and his Hollywood work. It's a lot lighter and a lot faster than a lot of the stuff he did before. If you've ever seen the original Drunken Master with Jackie Chan, that movie is boring. Like I don't know if I've ever finished watching it. Like I remember putting it on. I had seen Drunken Master 94. I was like, oh, it's based on like a previous Jackie Chan movie. That's great. I put it on and I'm like, I don't want to watch this. So maybe I should go back and give it another shot, but definitely, again, this movie's kind of like a good in between your Chinese and Hong Kong martial arts movies and Hollywood action movies, where it does have longer fight scenes, but the plot moves pretty fast. It's also an action comedy, which I think the nice thing about action comedies is that they allow for very over-the-top stuff and you kind of roll with it, whereas something like Man with the Iron Fist has to do a lot of like preliminary work to be like, this is the larger than life world that we live in, right? A comedy just slaps you right in there. So yeah, my number 2, Legend of Drunken Master, good times.
Very good.
Semi-historical. The character he plays, Wong Fei Hung, is an actual living being, although I doubt that story has a lot to do with the real Wong Fei Hung.
Yes, that's true. But if you look at any Kung Fu movie that's a period piece, there's like a 70% chance that the main character is Wong Fei Hung.
Yep.
In one way or the other.
Yep. All right. My number 2 is not a Chinese film, not a Japanese film. It is, in fact, an Indonesian film that came out in 2011 about an Indonesian police tactical squad that needs to go into an apartment block and take down not Jim Cotta, but somebody who is very, very, very bad. And what follows is the police, most of the tactical unit is wiped out except for one guy, and he fights his way to the top of the tower and defeats the bad guys left and right. It is, I think, when you see violence in like Chinese or Japanese martial arts films, when they punch somebody in the head and their head explodes, you're like, yeah, okay, that's a balloon or a pumpkin or a watermelon or something. It's pretty obvious that the violence in those movies are fake. Or like when someone gets their arm cut off or their head cut off, and so you can see the guys behind them with a bicycle pump pumping the blood out of the tube in the neck. You take a lot of that violence in those movies with a grain of salt. But with The Raid, when you see somebody get their arm broken, yes, it's still fake, but it makes you wince. When you see a guy fall down the center staircase and he's hitting himself in the head and in the back all the way down, you wince because it does feel that visceral and that real. The Raid is a fantastic movie. And I have not seen The Raid 2, but if you've seen, if anyone has seen the Judge Dredd movie, Dredd, it's very much the same premise. The action in both of those movies is very, very different. And if you were to ask me, do you want to watch The Raid or do you want to watch Judge Dredd or just Dredd? I will pick The Raid just because its action sequences are much more visceral than anything I've seen. Now, I have seen other movies that have very visceral action sequences. I think Indonesia puts out some very, I think Ong Bak is or Ong Bak is the other one that is super violent, but it's a lot of fun to watch. It didn't make my list.
Yeah.
But The Raid right there at my number 2. Matthew, what do you have for your number 2?
It's interesting that we go from The Raid to my number 2 because The Raid is actually heavily inspired by a film that was in the works in 1972 called Game of Death. Game of Death, in some people's minds, is the last actual film appearance of Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, of course, had recorded chunks of that film before his death, but the actual last appearance of Bruce Lee on film is my number 3, Enter the Dragon. And Enter the Dragon is... it's hard to describe Enter the Dragon for me because when I was a kid, never liked this movie. I watched it. I was like, man, this is slow. This is dull. This is weird. I'm not feeling it. And, it felt like every actor was kind of on their own page, which I think in the case of John Saxon might actually have been true. But you do get to a point, my daughter said to me that her grandmother said, as you get old, you'll get more conservative. And I said, you think that's true? And the child said, boy, I hope not. And I said, it's not true. I'm old and I'm not conservative at all. But I do think that as you get older, sometimes the brain gets more sophisticated and the brain becomes more aesthetically aware. So that when I watched this movie again after probably a decade, this would have been around 2004, 2005, I sat down and I felt like I was watching a completely different movie because Enter the Dragon is really wonderful. It is really solid. It's an amazing movie. And even though John Saxon is clearly in a different film, it kind of makes sense because John Saxon is, in fact, the person out of water in this particular thing. I mean, we are in Hong Kong. We are dealing it with, Shaolin martial arts. We're dealing with the culture. And Saxon is some sort of weird British operative who's totally not, I swear to you, not anybody from MI6, certainly not James Bond. But you get to the end of the movie and you're just like, yep, yeah, that was solid. That was amazing. And there's actually a Bruce Lee biopic from the 90s that ends with footage from Game of Death, not actual footage from Enter the Dragon and Game of Death, but simulated footage from Enter the Dragon and Game of Death with Jason Scott Lee playing Bruce Lee. And it's one of the most successful sequences of that film. Why? Because it kind of steals from the film that Robert Klaus and Bruce Lee and all the rest of the people made back in '73. So definitely, for me, one of the must-see kung fu, martial arts, whatever you want to call it, movie. If you want to see somebody kicking really hard, but actually have it be really cool, sometimes in a mirrored room, definitely watch Enter the Dragon. Bruce is very weird in this one, but it's cool weird.
Yeah, Enter the Dragon is my number one. I don't know why anybody wouldn't have Enter the Dragon as their number one. I mean, everybody should write in and just boo Matthew for putting Enter the Dragon at his number two. Enter the Dragon is one of those movies that when someone's like, hey, I like Mortal Kombat and I like spy movies and I like, beat 'em up, shoot 'em up things. And I hear that a lot of these things are based on like martial arts films of the 70s. I'm like, stop what you're saying. Sit down. We're going to watch Enter the Dragon. I think I showed my oldest kid Enter the Dragon when he was 5 or 6. Or maybe it was my second son, because he's the one that actually started doing martial arts when he was in 1st or 2nd grade. So I may have had them sit down and watch Enter the Dragon to get them pumped to get into the martial arts classes. So yeah, it is really good. Whether you're looking at, the spy part of what's going on, or whether you're looking at the tournament part that's going on, or whatever that's going on, Enter the Dragon is fantastic. So highly recommended. And that is my number one. Okay, with my number one out of the way, it's time to look at everyone else's number one. So, Rodrigo, what do you have for your number one?
My number one is another action comedy. It is a movie that I've seen lots of times, and I enjoy it every time. And there's always kind of something new to look at and to laugh with or at. And that is, of course, Shaolin Soccer.
Yep.
2001.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Now, people are going to say, why Shaolin Soccer and not Kung Fu Hustle?
Because Shaolin Soccer is better than Kung Fu Hustle.
Well, that's definitely what I think. But I think Shaolin Soccer doesn't jive with a lot of Americans because soccer is not that big in the United States. But coming from a country where soccer is life, it's like when I was a kid, I didn't like soccer. I didn't play soccer. I didn't start playing soccer until I got to the United States, actually, which meant I was very bad at that point, and definitely by Mexican standards.
Hey. No, I guess that's legit.
So
you're bad at soccer.
I'm saying if you're a high school kid, the standards are different. But anyway, even not being a big soccer person, there's a lot of soccer stuff in Shaolin Soccer that I think really enriches things. Just like I'm sure there's a lot of Chinese stuff in Shaolin Soccer that I'm not getting because I'm not Chinese, but coming from a culture that really cares about soccer, there's a lot of soccer stuff that I can get at.
I like Shaolin Soccer because I can't remember if this is Stephen Chow's first movie. I mean, I'm sure he was like a minor part in some other movies, kind of like Jackie Chan was in the background of a lot of Bruce Lee movies and that kind of stuff. This was the first time that I was made aware of Stephen Chow, and I really just dove into this movie as something that used crazy over the top special effects without apology and had the soccer theme and the martial arts theme. So when Kung Fu Hustle came out a few years later, I was just like, well, I already know all the gimmicks that Chow does. So I kind of think less of Kung Fu Hustle.
Yeah. Kung Fu Hustle is the nice thing about Kung Fu Hustle, like the thing that makes it worth a watch, possibly over Shaolin Soccer, is that Shaolin Soccer is a movie about soccer. Kung Fu Hustle is a movie about Kung Fu, right? And Kung Fu movies. So like the different masters and like their techniques, like stuff like the Buddhist palm and stuff. If you like Kung Fu movies, then, and if you've seen plenty of kung fu movies, there's a lot in Kung Fu Hustle to like.
Yeah.
As well, but you have to work at it, right? It's not like, again, for us Westerners, it doesn't just immediately hit all the buttons. It's like clicking a bunch of buttons, but we don't have, like, they don't connect to anything.
I think the reason why Kung Fu Hustle is liked a lot more than Shaolin Soccer is because with the success of Shaolin Soccer, when Kung Fu Hustle came out, that one got a wider release, so more audiences saw it first. It's kind of like when you watch a Guy Ritchie film, you're probably watching the Brad Pitt Guy Ritchie film is probably your first exposure to Guy Ritchie. So then when you watch Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, you're like, that one's not as good, even though it's the superior of the two films. But
yeah. Weirdly, I want to say Kung Fu Hustle was originally distributed by Disney.
It may have been,
which made it very weird, especially the part where, like literally called Evil Team, gains their amazing powers from American drugs. So I suppose put that in your pipe and smoke it. My number one, a movie that I would be happy to just go watch right now, Shaolin Soccer.
I don't know if it's available on the services. I don't know if it's a streamer. I know I had to get a physical copy of it, but
I
Kung
think
Fu
I might have.
Very easy to get a hold of.
Yeah, I might have a physical copy of it somewhere. I'm pretty sure I do.
All right, Matthew, what do you have for your number one?
Stephen Chow, by the way, was a huge deal in Hong Kong starting like 10 years before that, but none of it seemed to get to.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering if he was like background or small time stuff.
No, he was in one of the 91. He was in one of the the highest grossing films in Hong Kong history. Just like, whoa! My number one is a movie that I feel belongs in the number one position on my particular list. Is it a better movie than Enter the Dragon? You have to ask yourself, is it a better Kung Fu movie than Enter the Dragon? No. But fortunately, Kung Fu is only part of the zeitgeist. There's like some surrealism in there. There's some crazy fantasy stuff. There's some existentialism. There's some of that ever so hip multiversary. And nowhere in Enter the Dragon does anyone have to fight Jamie Lee Curtis. And that's why my number one, Everything Everywhere, All at Once. Jamie Lee Curtis killed Michael Myers not once, not twice, but 4 times. And so she is sort of a final boss in Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is not actually entirely a movie about the Kung Fu. The Kung Fu is an important part of the movie. And throughout, of course, the main character, Evelyn, is played by Michelle Yeoh, who is Kung Fu movie royalty, has been for years. She's a huge, big deal, which is why I always get mad when people are like, yeah, that movie did it without even a big star. And I'm like, Michelle Yeoh is right there. She is right there. You apologize to her. No. You apologize to her in Cantonese because I'm tired. Anyway, it's a wonderful movie. It's about a family that is kind of disintegrating, the relationship between a husband and a wife, between a mother and a child, the relationship between the universe and an everything bagel. And what it really breaks down to is a relationship between nihilism and hope. And you get to the end of the movie and you see the hope, you see the positivity in play, and you see that nihilism that has been the center of this whole story for like 125 minutes isn't going to win right now. And as James Kirk says, sometimes all we can do is not kill our enemies today. We will not kill today. Plus, it is a fabulous movie filled with every single actor who is wonderful. There's one kung fu battle involving, how shall we put this, marital aids and the application thereto, which, of course, is part of the underlying absurdism. And in context, it's hilarious. But then you're horrified. And then it's hilarious again. And then you're even more horrified. But everyone in this film is wonderful, including Gong Gong, played by James Hong, who is an international treasure. When James Hong passes away, I demand a day of mourning. I demand a universal day of mourning for Gong Gong. Also, James Hong is in this movie wearing a robot skeleton. So I'm just saying that if he ever gets ill, we now know what to do. We put him in a robot body, and we have robot James Hong. We program. Never mind. Okay, so my number one has James Hong fighting Jamie Lee Curtis. No, wait. Yes. Okay, good. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. It's a movie. I want to say it won a bunch of Oscars, and I think everybody is at least aware of it. And if you have not seen it, I do recommend when you get done with this particular episode, go ahead, download it, stream it, whatever it is. It's definitely available. I watched it just the other day accidentally. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. Deserves its number one slot.
Top 5 is a production of Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC, and is produced by me, Steven Schleicher. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future Top 5 topics, make sure you head over to our Discord server. Share your thoughts there.
This podcast is copyright 2024 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.